I had a relationship with my new boyfriend's son. He was a very handsome man, and I couldn't resist. Today we have a secret that I've decided to tell you, so subscribe to the channel and leave your like. My name is Janet. I'm 48 years old, and my relationship with Brandon was starting to take shape. We'd been dating for a few months. That's when Brandon invited me to spend the weekend at his house, in a quiet neighborhood in a small town. He wanted me to get to know his routine better, and above all, to feel more at home in his space. I accepted, even looking forward to the opportunity to deepen the relationship, but also with a strange feeling that something might go wrong. When Brandon invited me to spend the weekend at his house, something in me sensed that it would be important. We'd been dating for a few months, and although we liked each other, there was still a distance, an invisible line that no matter how hard we tried, we couldn't cross. I wasn't sure what was missing, but I felt that this weekend could help me understand. It was something deeper, that perhaps he didn't know, but I felt it in every look, in every gesture. Whatever was between the two of us just seemed to be postponed, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. Brandon's house was charming. It was in a quiet neighborhood, far from the chaos of the city, in a wooden chalet with large windows that opened onto a magnificent view of the lake. When I arrived, the smell of the freshly lit fireplace immediately enveloped me. Everything there seemed to be made to welcome you, but there was also something almost cinematic about it, as if the house held secrets or memories from a time that wasn't mine. I felt like an intruder, but I wasn't sure why. "This is my refuge," he said, showing me every corner of the house with that half-relaxed, half-distant smile. He was home, but I wasn't. Not yet. Brandon's son turned up by chance, or maybe it was fate. But when I saw Evan for the first time, it felt like something unexpected, something I couldn't control. He was 23 years old, with an energy that was hard to ignore. Unlike Brandon, he didn't have this distant calm. On the contrary, he exuded a quiet confidence, as if he didn't care about anything around him except what he was doing at the moment. I was in the hallway when he entered the room, his light footsteps on the wooden floor making a soft sound. He looked at me with a curious expression, and in that instant, I knew that whatever was brewing inside me wasn't going to be simple. "Hi," he said, in a voice so quiet that it disconcerted me. I replied with a smile, trying to stay focused, but my heart was racing in a way that made no sense. We spent some time together later that afternoon. He told me about his course, his projects, and even his life at university. The way he expressed himself, with that energy of someone who is searching for something in the world, attracted me. I knew I shouldn't feel that way. I knew Brandon was my boyfriend, but something about Evan was impossible to ignore. When Brandon called me to dinner, I breathed a sigh of relief, but I wanted to stay there, talking to Evan, but at the same time I knew I was getting away from the reason I was there. Why was this happening? I didn't want something like this to be happening inside me. I didn't want to feel this desire for Evan, but it was impossible to ignore. During the night while Brandon slept, I woke up thirsty for water and went to the kitchen. I walked to the hallway and looked discreetly through the ajar door. That's when I saw Evan sitting on the sofa, the soft light of the TV illuminating his face as he watched something I hadn't expected to find. Adult movies. I stood there, not knowing what to do, what to think. My body was paralyzed, unable to move, but my mind was agitated. I knew I shouldn't be there. I knew it was wrong, but something inside me told me to keep watching. Evan saw me. His eyes met mine for an instant that seemed eternal. The expression on his face quickly changed from surprise to slight embarrassment. He stood up quickly, but I interrupted him. There's no need to be embarrassed," I said, trying to sound calm, calmer than I really was. My voice came out softer than I'd imagined. I was just curious. He didn't answer, but the silence between us was real. The discomfort in the air was almost tangible, but it wasn't enough to make me leave. Instead, I moved a little closer. I knew I should leave, that I should get out of that situation. But there was something about that moment, about that look, that I couldn't let go of. "Do you mind if I watch along?" I said, more as a question to myself than to him. I was trying to understand what was going on, but all I felt was a growing tension, as if there was an invisible line being stretched between the two of us. Evan hesitated, but said nothing. What would happen now? I didn't know. I just knew that whatever it was, it wouldn't be easy to forget, until he opened his mouth. "Of course you can. Just don't notice certain things here." "Of course, honey, and if Brandon comes in, you hang up immediately, okay?" He laughed and agreed. I knew I should leave the room, that I should go back to my room and try to sleep. But something inside me was holding me there, a growing curiosity that I didn't know how to explain. He was sitting up, back on the sofa, but now he seemed more rigid, as if he didn't know how to react. I was far enough away not to invade his space, but close enough to feel the tension vibrating between us. I was no longer looking at the TV screen, but at him, at the subtle movements his body was making, trying to hide its discomfort. It was strange, a mixture of excitement and guilt, as if I'd crossed some line, but I still didn't know exactly which one. The heat on my face increased by the second, but I couldn't stop looking at him. Every time our gazes met, it was as if an invisible thread was stretching between us. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of everything that was happening. It was just a scene on the TV screen, but the situation seemed so much bigger. It was as if we wanted to bring that scene into real life. How could I explain it? How could anyone understand what was going on inside me? I'd been with Brandon for months, but everything that had seemed clear, what had seemed so certain until then, was being undone by a simple exchange of glances with his son. Evan finally spoke, but his voice came out hesitant, as if he was still processing everything that had happened between us. "I didn't expect you to like those kinds of movies." Those words seemed to disarm him, and at the same time, everything became clearer to me. He was as confused as I was. The situation was more tense than I could have imagined, and neither of us knew how to get out of it. "I only watch in hiding, but I love it," I confessed, my voice low and shaky. I no longer wanted to hide how much I wanted him. I wanted to understand what was happening to me, to him, to the environment. "I understand what you're feeling." His voice was now firmer. "If you like this story, leave a like and subscribe to the channel, because the ending is chilling." I didn't know what to say. No words seemed enough. What he was saying seemed so simple, but at the same time, it was too complicated for me to understand at that moment. He was right. Nobody had asked for any of this, but the situation was happening, and nobody knew what to do. The tension between the two of us continued to grow, and the physical distance between us seemed to diminish with every second. I could feel the warmth of his presence, even with his back to me. The sound of the house, the fireplace crackling in the other room, the wind beating against the windows, seemed to grow more distant, as if time had stopped. With every step he took, with every tiny movement he made, something inside me grew bigger. I knew I had to get out of the room, but somehow I couldn't. It was as if an invisible force was keeping me there, staring at this impossible situation, the soft light from the TV reflected off his eyes, and suddenly everything seemed very clear. I was in a strange place, trying to understand what was happening inside me, inside him. I didn't know where it would end, but there was a part of me that didn't want the night to end just yet. "Do you know why I know? One of my father's girlfriends had a relationship with me, and she acted the way you're acting, but look, it's our secret now, you see. My father can't know." He told me laughing, and there was no way I couldn't laugh too. He'd told me a secret, so I was willing to take that risk too. "It's our secret now," I said, looking him in the eye. That night was starting to drag on, but I knew that somehow I wouldn't be able to sleep. I couldn't get rid of the feeling that everything around me was spiraling out of control. The wall of tension between me and Evan was starting to break down. With every minute that passed while Brandon was asleep, I was getting closer to Evan. I knew something was brewing between me and him, something that wasn't just confusion. It was more than that. I could feel that it was real, a dangerous flame that would give me a lot of happiness that night. I got up and walked to the window in one corner of the house, trying to find some kind of relief in the silence of the night. Outside, the sky was clear, but the stars were few, obscured by the haze of the city in the distance. The lake I had seen when I arrived at Brandon's house now seemed darker, without that peaceful glow. The water reflected only the shadows of the trees and the house, as if the surrounding nature was also hiding something that didn't want to be seen. I took a deep breath and moved away from the window. The sound of the wood creaking under my feet echoed through the empty room. The house was quiet, too quiet, and I missed something, or someone. Brandon's room seemed far away, and I knew he was probably still asleep. Then I heard the sound of light footsteps. It wasn't Brandon. It was Evan. He was coming, and his footsteps were silent. But the sensation of his presence made me stop where I was, my heart racing, my breathing faster. I didn't want him to see me there, waiting. But he appeared in the doorway, and the look we exchanged was charged with something I could no longer ignore. He was different now. Something had brought him to me, just as something had brought me to him. "I thought you were asleep," he asked, his voice low, almost hesitant, as if it were a provocation he didn't know if he should make. I didn't know what to say straight away. What was going on inside me was so confusing, so tangled, that no words seemed enough. I wanted to run away from it all, but I couldn't. I just couldn't. He was there in front of me, and any attempt to push him away seemed futile. "I can't sleep," I said at last, my voice weaker than I had imagined. Evan took a step forward, and the distance between us narrowed. I could feel the warmth of his presence, as if he were closer. But at the same time, there was something comforting about the way he approached, as if he was trying to understand me without words, as if he was trying to make me see that somehow he was as lost as I was. "I don't want it to get weird. Let's enjoy tonight," he said, almost as if he were blaming himself. But he didn't have to. He wasn't to blame for any of this. I knew that, in a way, I was responsible for the situation, for the mess that was forming between us. And it was at that moment that everything seemed to become even more real. The distance between us no longer existed. I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know how it was going to end. Time seemed to be dragging on, but the feeling that something was about to happen only increased. The house, once so peaceful, now seemed to be the scene of something I couldn't control. The feeling of unease in me was growing, but at the same time, I didn't know whether to stop what was happening or let it happen. I looked at him, and something in his gaze made me understand that he too was torn, that the tension between us wasn't just mine. "Janet," he whispered my name, and the sound of my own identity coming from his lips made me shudder. Something was about to happen, and we both knew it. Evan stepped forward once again, but this time, I didn't step back. Instead, my eyes closed for a second, trying to process the emotions inside me. When I opened my eyes, he was closer, and the warmth of his presence was impossible to ignore. It was as if the invisible line between us, which had once seemed clear, had disappeared. Now everything was blurred, and I knew deep down that there was no turning back. Not for me, not for him. I didn't know what that meant, but I knew that, at that moment, whatever was happening for real. "Let's do it then, but it has to be our secret," I said, my voice shaking, trying to understand my own words. But he didn't say anything. He just moved closer, his gaze now so close to mine that I could feel his breathing. For a moment, the world around us disappeared. There was no more room for doubt or fear, just the sound of our breathing, the pressure of what was to come, and the silent realization that there was no turning back. This was a decision I would have to face, and although I knew the consequences, I couldn't avoid what was already happening inside me. His touch was gentle, but charged with an intensity that made me shudder. His hand on my shoulder felt like a confirmation of what I already knew, something that, despite everything, was real. I was lost, but at the same time, there was a strange feeling that it was also inevitable. Every second was marked by a growing urgency, a need that couldn't be ignored. When his lips finally touched mine, it felt wonderful. There was no more room for indecision. That was the only thing that seemed to make sense. And at that moment, all the internal dilemmas that had been consuming me seemed to disappear. I knew that from now on, nothing would be the same. The road ahead was full of danger and consequences, but at the same time, a part of me felt a kind of liberation, as if the choice had been made, not rationally, but almost instinctively. But at the same time, I couldn't deny what was to come. The questions about what would happen to Brandon, what this meant for me, for them, all of this was yet to come. Whatever happened next, I knew it was a step of no return, and there was no going back. But at the moment, I was enjoying every kiss from Evan. "Let's go to my room. It'll be quick. Then you go back to your room so my dad won't be surprised." So we did. I had a wonderful relationship with Evan. And before I went back to my room, I wrote down Evan's contact number so we could make an appointment to hide from Brandon. I was lying in bed, eyes fixed on the ceiling, trying to organize the thoughts in my head. How had I gotten there? How had I let things get to this point? Not that I wasn't enjoying it. I hadn't expected doing something dangerous to be so good. I knew that what I had done wasn't simple. I knew that the secret I was now carrying was dangerous. But at the same time, there was an inexplicable feeling that something had changed in me. Part of me felt that, somehow, this was what I wanted, but another part wondered if I could live with the consequences. Evan had somehow become part of something that was now mine. I wanted to forget. I wanted to put what had happened behind me, but I couldn't. And deep down, I knew that the secret between the two of us was something that could consume me from the inside out. It was a secret that couldn't be revealed. Something we were both carrying. I looked at the cell phone on the table next to me, and as if it were an instinctive reaction, picked it up. It was strange, but somehow I knew I would need it. So at that moment, I looked up Evan's number. The number he had given me, still as a kind of silent exchange, almost without words. I knew he would understand. I knew that he also carried the same weight now. But at the same time, I didn't know how to deal with it. How to deal with something so dangerous, so real, and yet so far from what it should be. The temptation to send a message was great. I wanted to know what he thought, what he felt, what he would do with what had happened. But for some reason, I hesitated. The impulse was as strong as the doubt. So finally I typed, "I can't stop thinking about you. I'm already imagining our next time." It was a simple message, but loaded with meaning. I didn't know what he would say, but I needed that confirmation. Within seconds, the phone vibrated, and when I saw his reply, my heart leapt. "Me too, but we have to be careful. This can't be revealed." Those words silently ignited a flame in me. I knew he was right. What had happened could not be exposed. It couldn't be shared with anyone. It was our secret now, something that bound us together in a way that no one would ever understand. I put my cell phone back on the table and walked away. So there I was, living a double life. A secret that was too heavy to carry, but also a flame that I didn't want to extinguish. Every time I thought of Brandon, I also thought of Evan, and the dilemma between them became deeper, more painful. I knew I needed time to reflect on everything, but as the days went by, the secret was still there, echoing in my mind, a constant and disturbing thought. And so I lived on, a secret, a desire that couldn't be exposed, but which nevertheless existed in me, between me and Evan, in every furtive glance, in every message exchanged, in every silence shared. That was my report, loves. What do you think I should do? Leave it in the comments, and if you liked it, don't forget to leave your like and subscribe to the channel by activating the notification bell so you don't miss any videos. Bye-bye, and see you tomorrow.